This is Duke University.
Good afternoon, alumni. Hello from snowy Durham. On behalf of the school, I'd like to welcome you to this live session. And my name is Christine Mormon, and I'm on the marketing faculty here at Fuqua. I've been doing research in the area of marketing strategy for the last 25 years and founded and direct the CMO survey for the last 6 or so years. So what I'd like to do today is to receive some additional questions that you might have about the topic of marketing strategy, specifically the management of marketing analytics and social media. We have a couple of questions that have come in early, and if you have questions that arise during the session, you can tweet those to us at #FuquaAlumni. And we have approximately 45 to 60 minutes together, and I'll address as many questions as I can during that time. So I thought what I might do just to begin is give you sort of a recap of what we talked about in the pre-reading session, which is basically the fact that companies are spending an enormous amount of their marketing budgets on both social media and marketing analytics. But at the same time, we see several important challenges that are arising in the management of these, what you might call even innovations within companies. On the social media side, we see the primary challenge is one of fitting all of this social media activity to the firm's marketing strategy. How to do that, how to organize to do that, how to think through the process of developing a strategy to do that. On the marketing analytics side, the fundamental challenge is that although companies are spending more, as I mentioned, they're actually not using more of the marketing analytics that they're developing. Some of this is a matter of analysis, but there are also fundamental organizational problems that contribute to the lack of use of marketing analytics. So that's sort of where we are in terms of the pre-reading. And if you're interested in any of the details associated with that, there are additional reports online at cmosurvey.org. But I thought I might start, given this integration problem is something that I've thought about before the session, to kind of share with you some ideas for how you might bridge that integration gap. And one of the ways to think about this, and one tool that I would offer you, is a kind of a report card. So if we go to Exhibit 1, what you can see in Exhibit 1 is that there are a number of ways in which the company might think about this integration problem. For example, if the company actually manages its customers in a certain way, or its brand, or its innovation, this will contribute to that integration. So as an example, if both the social media activity and the rest of the firm's marketing strategy are focused on a particular target customer, or the firm's most valuable customer, this will make a big difference in terms of the integration problem being solved, because they'll both be focused on exactly the same thing. I think sometimes with social media what we see is that companies are sort of spreading out their message across all different targets. So I think this sort of focus on your target customer is important. Same thing with the brand. Your brand, whatever it is, should be something that is uniformly shown to the marketplace. So this image, whatever benefits you're describing vis-a-vis your brand, those should be consistent. And think about other kinds of topics that I have listed here on the report card. These are really questions that you could ask your management team, which I think if, the answers to will give you some insights in terms of how well you're integrating. I like these sets of criteria for organization, which I think is a big problem for social media. So is social media a part of the firm's strategic planning process? If it's a part of the marketing strategy, it really needs to be. Is it evaluated on financial criteria that are similar to the rest of the firm's marketing strategy? Is the social media department actually yoked to the rest of the firm's marketing department? Or are they sitting in a separate space, concerned with separate things? These are all things that can contribute to integration, because then we see information that's being shared between the two groups in an effective way. Another way that we can think about this that I'll share with you, just another set of insights I did a set of interviews with a couple of our MBA students, daytime MBA students, Becky Ross and Shannon Gorman, and we talked to a series of digital officers and marketing leaders within companies and asked them to offer insights into this integration problem. And as we sorted their responses, we see sort of two general types of responses. One is on the strategic side, and then the other is again on this organizational side. Let me go through a few of these because I think they might be useful to all of you. They certainly were to us as we did the interviews. The first is this idea of focusing on strategy over tools. I think sometimes with these innovations such as social media that are coming into companies and the large number of tools that are being introduced on a regular basis, we observed this phenomenon of kind of tool fascination, that we have to do Pinterest because everybody's doing Pinterest, for example. And I think the key thing is to really think about your strategy. Who is your customer? What is your brand? How is it that you would like to communicate that information to your customer? What kind of relationship do you want to have with your customer? So really thinking about that as opposed to just focusing on the newest tool because everybody else is doing it. The second thing is to really think about your goals. What are your marketing strategy goals? And in particular, what are your customer goals? Because your social media actions should be driven against those goals as opposed to just social media action 1 or 2. The third is to really think about facilitating the customer's movement between these online activities, of which social media is a big part, and offline activities. How will you help the customer move between these two channels seamlessly? If we want to get the greatest impact for the joint effect of these two tools, we need to think about facilitating that movement. And then lastly, we heard some companies talking about creating social media toolkits. These are essentially templates that you might give to different groups that are using different web tools that ensure there is strategic alignment. So they might dictate certain terms but allow freedom for other things that are specific to a particular strategic activity. And then on the organizational side, again, a lot of the work of this integration problem I think gets done when we think about how to organize. So having somebody really champion integration, putting social media activities on the brand and customer team as opposed to them sitting in a separate space and having separate kind of activities. Balancing in-house and agency expertise. We talked about this in the pre-reading that in fact when you outsource a lot of your social media activity, it's not necessarily per se bad, but the challenge there is to ensure integration because the agency is going to have its own ideas, its own kind of ways that they go to market, and all of this needs to be coordinated in a systematic fashion. And then finally, this idea of being willing to say no. As the web gains kind of notoriety and teams within an organization get excited about the possibility of reaching and interacting with customers through these tools, it's important for marketing leaders, digital leaders, to be able to say no, so that there are, that every group doesn't need its own Twitter account, every group doesn't need its own Facebook page. There needs to be kind of a coordinated approach that the company goes to market and interacts with its customers through these tools. So those are sort of two, I think, nice, if you will, general sets of ideas for integrating social media. If you want a little bit more detail on any of these insights that we gained either from the interviews or from the report card, you can look at some of the blogs that we published online at Forbes. So I thought I'd start with one question that we received from Max Wien, who is a daytime 2008 student. Thanks for the question, Max. Max asks about actually a very fundamental problem that we see going on with this issue of using metrics in an online world. He asks, or he notes that I've created custom scorecards based on client KPIs, but this typically measures impressions, buzz, clicks, video views, and interaction without clearly attributing the customer's purchases. What are some of the best measurement techniques that you can suggest, and what suggestions do you have for attribution models? So maybe just backing up one step before we answer this specific question, and for those of you that aren't familiar with this idea of what the attribution problem is, the attribution problem arises when we try to sort of give credit to a particular marketing activity, social media activity in specific for a customer's purchase or whatever stage of the sort of funnel that we're thinking about, in particular to the purchase of a product or service. And the attribution problem arises when we give credit to one particular activity when it actually wasn't really the cause of the customer's purchase. And a very common form of that occurs when companies use the very last touch that they have with customers. So it might be, for example, in a keyword search, customers are typing in the keyword search, and following that search, they make a purchase. When the company attributes that keyword search to fully explain the customer's purchase, generally, we've made an attribution error because we can't give full credit to that keyword search for the customer's purchase. In fact, what if the customer saw an ad? What if the customer walked by a bricks and mortar store? What if the customer saw a display ad earlier in their online activities? All of these may be contributing to the customer's purchase. And so it's really important to try to sort this out because, in fact, as you can imagine, if you make the attribution error, then you may actually invest in things that are not really the causal force. And the reason that search, the keyword search often gets credit is that it is often that very last thing that the customer is doing. But in fact, they are already in the purchase process if they're keyword searching generally. So we don't want to give too much credit to those words. So what's the best way to sort this out? There are a variety of companies I know and a variety of statistical techniques for doing this. But in fact, really the gold standard for sorting out the attribution problem is experimentation. Companies can use experiments, online experiments actually fairly readily these days, to be able to manipulate different activities that they use to reach their customers and then understand, in fact, what it is that might be causing that ultimate consumer behavior. And what we see, if we can go to Exhibit 3, actually Exhibit 4. So I wanted to show this data to you because it shows that, in fact, most companies aren't using experiments in this way. Only 12% of companies are measuring their marketing ROI through experiments. When in fact it's relatively easier to do this today than it was because so many companies are offering various tools to do so. Now the idea here would be, to try to control some aspect of your strategy and then look at either pre-post or if you can do some kind of geo-targeted manipulation where you might have matched cities, which you could do if you're able to determine that these cities have similar demographics, psychographics, other consumer characteristics that are important, and then sort out if you manipulate a certain marketing strategy in one of those markets and not in another, do you get this effect? That would be ultimately the ideal approach to use, not just a pre-post, but where you have a control group where you can compare the lift that you get in the market where you've done some marketing strategy. So I think that when I've talked to executives about the use of these experiments, I think generally they see it as something that's costly, something that they're nervous about doing because they're giving maybe one part of the market access to information or deals or price differences. That's certainly something to be concerned about. But at the same time, I think in terms of sorting out this attribution error, this is absolutely the ideal way to do it. So if you can do it in a way using some of the tools that are available, I would encourage you to do so. And by virtue of this data, we can see that, in fact, if you're able to do so successfully, I think you could, there may be some competitive advantage that's associated with doing it because not very many companies are doing it. So the second question that I thought I would deal with, this is one that I don't have a good answer for, is from Jonathan Graffio. Jonathan's a cross-continent student from 2011. He asks for a particular literature that you recommend for studying the integration of social media into the firm's marketing strategy. I don't have a good answer for you, Jonathan. That's why, in fact, we're studying it within the CMO survey, and why Shannon and Becky and I did the interviews, because we wanted to get some additional insight. This is something that I'm going to continue to track and would love to continue to offer insights on this topic. Okay. And then the last question that we had that came in advance is from Sarv Kothadaraman. Hi, Sarv. Sarv was one of the TAs in my marketing strategy class back in 2012, so I hope you're doing well. Sarv asks a more general question, which is that he says, I saw a lot of online marketing metrics such as web traffic, abandoned carts being featured to track web sales. I'm curious if the CMO survey learned anything about marketing metrics across channels other than online. I'd be interested in your thoughts about what metrics one should consider when measuring marketing effectiveness of traditional channels such as direct sales force, stores, etc. So one book that I can recommend to you, Sarv, is a book that Paul Ferris wrote. It's called Marketing Metrics, The Definitive Guide to Measuring Marketing Performance. Paul's a friend of mine. I think this is a wonderful book, and it really is contains kind of an encyclopedia, if you will, of different types of metrics, and Paul has a lot of experience in vetting those metrics. So take a look at that first. But I will say that just in general terms, that I think good metrics often have several important features. So one is, as we mentioned earlier, they should really reflect your goals. You should be measuring what you hope to achieve, right? So think about your goals and then think about what metric best represents that. And that leads to the second point, which is that, measures are an abstraction of reality. So in fact, you need to be very careful that your metrics are in fact measuring what you think they are, because there are many ways in which measures can be invalid. In fact, we teach an entire course here in our marketing curriculum on marketing intelligence, where we focus on generating good metrics. But fundamentally, I think the final thing that I want to mention is that your metrics really should be focused on your customers. It's important ultimately to link those metrics to things like profits, but you should also think about the funnel, where your customers are in the funnel, where they are in different stages of the funnel, capturing their progression through that funnel. I think that's very important. And then ultimately, being able to connect that to things like purchase, profits, is something that companies will have to do as well. So we have a couple of other questions that came in. These are good questions. So the first question here is from John Vegg. He's a Global Executive MBA 2014 from Houston, and he asks, how are global companies managing social media to integrate brands across cultures and languages having different expectations? And I guess those expectations may be management's expectations. That's what I'll assume here. I don't think that the answer to this question is any different than you might think about managing a brand in general across countries, across cultures. Certainly the implementation, because you have something that's very alive and responsive in the case of most social media, needs to be dealt with in a very sensitive way as we think about cultures and languages. But I don't think that basically the way in which this is done should vary depending on how, whether you're using social media or whether you're using other kinds of marketing strategies. I like this idea of really thinking about having some kind of centralized control, but also allowing things to happen locally that need to happen locally. And social media may be one of those areas where more of the interaction does need to be local. And so I think, one common mistake that we see a lot of companies making is that they retain too much control at the overall corporate level. And one of the cases that I'll do in my class this upcoming semester is the case of the Oreo in China. And fundamentally, one of the mistakes that was going on there in the failure of the Oreo among Nabisco executives was that they weren't thinking that much about the Chinese customer. And so, this idea of allowing local managers who have deeper insights into those customer behaviors, the norms, the standards, especially among the target customer. So I think it's important not just to think globally about, for example, Chinese customers, but maybe it's Chinese moms who are buying these cookies or young people who are buying a particular product, and allowing insights from local managers to guide the marketing strategies in those countries. Okay. So Tom McCrary, Daytime 1982. How much of the analytics challenge is about data integration versus interpretation? Well, that's a good question. I would say probably it's more a problem of integration, because one of the charts that I showed you in the pre-reading was this issue of the fact that, this kind of 360-degree view of the customer across purchasing channels, social media channels, and then other kind of offline channels. A lot of companies really haven't figured that out. They still have kind of separate bins of information. And for a lot of companies, it will remain a challenge because they don't have a lot of direct interaction with their customers. There's a channel member in between them. So I think a big part of it is integration. But on the other hand, Tom, I think it's also important to realize that interpretation is also a challenge. One of the things that we talk a lot about among the marketing faculty is that, we need to make sure that we're training people who can actually look at the output of a predictive model and say, this is what this means, and this is how I should use this information to guide my marketing strategy. And one of the things that I can share with you is that I did a blog with some friends at McKinsey, and we asked in the CMO survey to guide this blog, do companies have the right talent to fully leverage their marketing analytics? So if we look at Exhibit 5, what you can see there, this was asked, I think, about 6 months ago, on a 7-point scale, where 1 is we do not have the right talent and 7 is that we have the right talent. The mean is, I would say, on the low side, 3.6. So most companies don't feel that they have the right talent in place to leverage their marketing analytics. And I think this is one of the problems that we see, one of the reasons why we see so much marketing analytics being kind of left to sit, because companies just don't have the right people in place. And if we look at Exhibit 6, in fact, we ran a little bit more analysis for this blog, which is up on HBR, and we looked at, we took that indicator, that 7-point scale, and we put companies either into a high or low bin, where they either have high, they have the right talent to leverage their marketing analytics, or low, they don't have the right talent. And what you can see there is that across those two groups, companies rate the contribution of marketing analytics, again, that's on a 7-point scale, significantly higher if they do have the right talent, a 4.0 as opposed to a 2.8. So companies do seem to be able to get more out of their marketing analytics when they have the right people in place to interpret and use the marketing analytics. I would add to that, Tom, that in fact, I think one of the problems, and this is no different than the social media problem, that we often have the marketing analytics people sitting in one place in the company, and they can often be corporate people, but they're not really yoked to the product managers or brand managers, depending on how the company is organized, who are making decisions, who need to, who need the marketing analytics to drive those decisions. And so, matching those people up, having them physically close to one another, I've seen this happen in a lot of companies, that can solve a lot of the problem, because then the marketing analytics types know what the pressing problems of the product manager are. They can informally interact and, develop, whatever ideas they might have about what data might mean, what questions should be added to the arsenal of things that the company is studying in their marketing analytics area. So I hope that helps. That's a great question. So Paul Duty, Daytime 1993, asked this question: any insight as to the difference in approach between B2B and B2C? It's a good question, Paul, and I think one of the reasons that the CMO survey actually, one of the challenges of the CMO survey, I should say, is that there is a lot of variety out there in the way that companies manage marketing, depending on whether they're B2B, B2C, product, service. And we look actually at all four of those conditions in great detail in the reports that are part of the CMO survey. So all of the data that I'm sharing with you today and other types of data that the CMO survey collects break out each of these responses by B2B product, B2B service, B2C product, and B2C product and services. So all four of these conditions. One of the examples that I can give to you about this difference, this goes back to, I think, Exhibit 3, and where we actually take each of these four categories and we look at this social media integration problem. And as you can see here, we took that 7-point scale and we broke it into either the top 2 boxes, the middle 3 boxes, or the bottom 2 boxes. And as you can see, the B2C product companies actually have achieved the highest level of social media integration. So 27%, 27.5% are in those top 2 boxes. So I think there are differences across the sectors. We often see, with regard to some of these more vexing organizational analytic problems, that B2C product companies are out in front, that they've invested financially, that they've invested in hiring, and they've been able to solve some of these problems much more effectively. So Joe Goddard, 2010, asks, are there any companies you would consider best in class at understanding customers, their purchases, and profitability? One of the things that the CMO survey does is it offers an award, the CMO survey award for marketing excellence. And we ask companies to denote which company across all industries they think is really most effective at marketing, and then also within their industry. And we recently made those awards for the February survey, and Apple won the overall award. I think they've won it 6 times in a row now. And I think, to some extent, I think what Apple does so well is that they really do have a deep understanding of their customers, in part because their employees are so empathetic with the customers. They, in fact, spend a lot of time thinking about the customer's experience. Some of that's in usability testing, but some of that is also, in a forward-looking sense, thinking about how to best design products and services for their customers. And I think they've also done a very nice job really thinking about how to manage that customer relationship. So I think I would reframe the question, Joe, maybe a little bit away from thinking about just understanding the purchases and profitability of customers, but also to get really close to the customer in a way that we have this long-term relationship with customers. And then, in fact, it's easier to think about managing the relationship because the customer is, in fact, doing a lot of the work, giving you a lot of insights. For Apple, in their particular case, through their stores, online, Apple is really able to understand their customers in great detail and manage those relationships in a very, very customized way. So even though they're an innovator, clearly, they're also a terrific manager of the customer relationship. So I think this says, what about intent-based marketing? I don't know if that's internet-based marketing. I'm not sure. There's a question here from Danny Bree. Maybe he can clarify intent-based marketing and tracking intent over time. Customer, this would be like intention to purchase. Danny, maybe you can just clarify that for us, because I think that would be helpful when I offer a response, because I'm not sure. I haven't heard these terms before. So I'll turn, while Danny's giving us a follow-up on Twitter, let me turn to Rhonda Hurwitz and Daytime 79. And thank you for the compliment, Rhonda. And Rhonda asks, in your experience, do mid-market companies budget and execute differently? The answer, I think, is yes. In fact, one of the other things that we do within the CMO survey is we break, the other indicator that we break all of the data out across is the size of the company as reflected in the revenues. So we can see, in fact, that there are very clear differences between the small companies on the one hand and the larger companies. So I can't specifically give you any differences, but in general I would say that the smaller companies are going to be more nimble. They're probably learning faster how to do some of the things that we've been talking about in the social media area. I think on the marketing analytics side, probably the larger companies have the advantage because it is more expensive for companies to build these insights and these databases about customers. So that's probably as much as I can say on that particular topic. Well, one of the other things I thought I would talk about with you today, and this is actually a very big problem, and we hinted at it, and I'd like to get feedback on this from all of you, because it's something that I worry about, and that is the lack of quantitative metrics that companies have in place to demonstrate the impact of marketing strategy. And we've been asking this question now for a couple of years as part of the CMO survey, and this goes directly to the issue of marketing analytics. And if we look at Exhibit 7, and I showed you a little bit of this in the pre-reading related to social media, what you can see in that exhibit is that most companies have a lot of difficulty proving the impact of marketing using various kinds of quantitative metrics, and that there are still a large group of companies that haven't been able to show the impact at all. And so, what are some of the issues here in terms of, getting the right metrics, thinking through the development of both organizational systems as well as specific measures to be able to get this work done effectively. And I think experimentation, which we talked about earlier, is an important part of that. Just a couple of other points that I could make on this particular topic is this idea of building in metrics to actually guide what you do in the future. So the metrics should not only be evaluative, tell you how you've done in the past, but also give you some insights into what you might do in the future. So thinking about developmental metrics for the organization as well, I think is an important step for all of you to take. So let's see, Danny's given us a response. He says, intent-based marketing is the ability to derive a customer's intent to action based on their past social posting. Okay, good. So I think the idea here is that we would take the data that we have, looking at a variety of maybe indicators that we have about social posting, number, the range of media that was used by the customer, the exact words that were used. And we could develop measures to reflect each of these, and then see if we can actually predict their purchase over time. So we would do this on the basis of past data. We would use our data and we would try to figure out, and this is where some of the creativity, I think, of marketing analytics comes through, and a deep understanding of customer behavior. What are some of those things that customers are doing online that we can observe, that we can measure, that we can then use those measures to determine not only whether they predict, but when they predict. So we can use some modeling to predict sort of the timing of that purchase as well, which I think companies are really interested in as well. So once we develop those models and we find that we can in fact predict what customers are going to be doing or when they're going to do it, we can then use the parameters from that model to then figure out, what customers are going to be doing in the future. So we take the parameters from the model that we've estimated, and now we use those parameters to predict based on, what we see customers are doing. So we would apply those parameters in this predictive way. And if we see somebody engaging in a certain behavior, then we'll have a sense that, that they're likely to purchase or they're not likely to purchase. And in fact, probably the most meaningful thing that companies can do is that they could in fact try to profile customers that are engaged in a certain set of customer behaviors online that they know are likely to be, drive them into purchase, or to think about interventions that they could develop that could correct some of the problems. So how could they get customers to post more frequently? How could they get them to engage in a certain way that they know later on predicts purchase? So I think those are all important things to think about in terms of basically predicting what customers are going to be doing in the future. Okay, so Kara. Hi, Kara. Kara was in my daytime class in 2013, and she asks, what can companies do to protect customer data security in marketing analytics? It's a good question, and we talked in the pre-reading about the fact that marketers report that, in fact, they are collecting more data about customers in their online behaviors, whether it's social media or purchasing, search, these kinds of things. But that at the same time, they didn't report being worried about the privacy of that data. And I think in part that's due to the fact that generally companies are pretty good at protecting customer data. Other kinds of things that can be done is we can strip away identifying information from databases so that if there is some kind of breach of security, that the hackers, et cetera, would not be able to get access to the most important customer behavior. We have to do this with our research activities. We have to separate the identification number, for example, if we collect that from a customer, their social security number, from any information that we store about those customers when we do our studies here at the university. And that's one simple way to protect customers, to separate these two so that if there is a breach, the most important information is not accessed. I think the other way to think about this, though, and the way that I like to think about it, and I think the way that I see most companies thinking about this, is that, in fact, the use of online data by companies is a real win for customers. But of course, that depends on companies being able to use that information, not in a way that they can manipulate customers, but in a way that they can offer them information, that they can offer them products and services, especially if those are customized in some way to the customer's liking. I think that's something that can help companies create value for customers, but also help customers save time and in their purchase of products and services. I think none of us like to think about, companies taking advantage of us, and I think that's probably the biggest concern that customers have. The FTC, for example, we talked about this in an earlier blog, has put together a set of voluntary recommendations for companies to abide by in their use of customer data. And I think that's an easy thing for companies to do, to adopt those kinds of guidelines and to make them industry standards so that customers can actually completely trust that companies are using information to help them, but not take advantage of them. So what other questions do we have about social media, about marketing analytics? The CMO survey has a range of other topics that I would also encourage those of you that are interested in marketing, the whole management of marketing, the whole topic of marketing leadership, which is a big deal when we think about marketing analytics and social media. But there are a range of other topics that also arise within the CMO survey. So Kara follows up with, what can companies do to not freak out customers? I feel like some targeted ads become too invasive. I think that's true. I know that this has happened to me where I've sort of done a one-off search for something, and then the display ads keep following me for a certain period of time. One of the things that companies can do is to ask customers to agree to use such information. Seth Godin talks about this it's kind of an older term, but permission marketing. The idea is that I raise my hand and I say, I would like you to be able to use this information to provide me with advertisements, to provide me with related products and services that you think I might be interested in. And then the sense of this creepy feeling, I think that Kara is referring to is something that it's not even present, because we know that we've sort of bought into this idea that companies are going to be able to have this type of relationship with us. I think that's important. The other thing is to offer customers a variety of opportunities to opt in and opt out of different kinds of exposure. I think what most of us do when we, for example, sign up for something is we opt in once, but we're not really given an opportunity to either deepen that relationship. We might want to opt in a deeper way, which I think a lot of customers might do, or we might actually want to dial that level of exposure back. We have to think about doing that. We have to go in and change our preferences, et cetera. But that's something, if we think about the relationship that a company has with its customers, there's no reason that shouldn't be an ongoing dialogue that companies have. And that's something that I would like to see, and I think it's easy enough to implement. Okay, so here we have another question from John Vegg, who's the global executive from 14, and he asks the question, is social media marketing changing a global company's way to effectively engage in product versioning across borders? I think the answer is yes, specifically when we think about services, because services, the intangibility of services means that we can easily change what we offer, so many details of the way in which we go to market and we interact with customers. I think it's easy to think about really any online activity that's service related being different across different international markets. And in fact, if you think about the adoption of these products and services as something it's a process that's going on, companies probably shouldn't go to market and have the same products and services in each of their markets, depending on where that market is in its adoption cycle. Maybe customers are just learning about the product. Maybe they want trial size versions of the product. And if the company comes to market with the product that they've been selling in say a Western market or in their home market, they may not induce trial because the product is, for example, either too expensive or too large for the customer to get a sense of how to try it. So I think both the nature of the products and in particular the services should easily change across borders if that's something where the company sees differences. But also any aspect of the company's social media activity, I think, can shift depending on the market. I think the biggest thing that companies need to be worried about is that there would be some kind of spillover effect to another market. Generally, that's not the case, but when we think about international kinds of social media, kinds of tools like Twitter, for example, where the whole world can be watching, although many countries have their own such social media tools. I think the biggest concern would be that there would be some kind of spillover to a market where you wouldn't want exposure to either a certain message or to a certain version of the product if, say, you were trying to manage that developmental cycle the way that I was describing. So that's something where you can do this kind of geo-targeting that we were talking about earlier with regard to experiments. You can also do it with regard to using various kinds of tools, both within a large market, say like China or the United States, but also across markets where you might be able to vary the product depending on, again, where they are in that cycle. So what other questions do you have for me? What other things can I answer for you? Okay, here's a question from Erin Clifford. I'm not sure which program you were in, Erin, but thank you for the question. I appreciate it very much. So Erin asks, how are companies handling reputation management? Are there dedicated departments and tools, and how are they measuring ROI? So I think this reputation management question really fits into the broader question of the company's brand. Often brands are at the product or service level, but often the brand is the overall company, or it can be both. You know, we have a Duke University brand, and we have a Fuqua School of Business brand, and then we have program level brands like Cross Continent or Daytime, for example. So the brand can exist at multiple levels. When we think about what kinds of meanings do customers attach to our overall company, what kinds of knowledge do they have about what we stand for and what we do, I think that's all part of this reputation management question. So I think it really does go back to a branding question. I think the best companies handle that in a way where they really think about what kind of value they want to offer their customers. And, you know, of course there are crises that can emerge that have to be dealt with, but I think the broader question of what is it that you stand for? What is it that you want to stand for? Not just in the marketplace of competitors, but from the customer's perspective. What is it that you stand for? What is it that you can do for them to make their lives better? I think that's the most important way to think about this question. From what I can see, I think there are larger PR groups that deal with this issue of reputation management. I think more and more marketing gets involved in that, though, because so much of the company's brand is a big part of public relations, which I think, you know, reputation management could fit into. The tools that they're using, I mean, I think social media tools can help them. We see companies using various kinds of ways to measure the sentiment, for example, that customers express in their discussions about companies and brands. And I think a lot of companies have been able to capture that text, quickly respond to that text to avert problems that might be emerging, especially among customers that ultimately will lead opinion. So really being able to think about how we can use social media to understand what those problems might be that customers are, you know, writing about our company and about our brand. I think that's probably the broader way to think about this topic of reputation management, and also to think about the role really of social media in helping us do that. And one thing that I like to encourage companies to do is to really think ahead of time, to really think through ahead of time what those possible problems may be, and to develop contingency plans that might arise, you know, whether it's, you know, problems with a plane, whether it's problems with the specific product or the use of the product. That's not something that should be left until the crisis, you know, to when the crisis occurs. It should be thought about ahead of time. It should be, we should know exactly what we're going to do, you know, if a problem arises. So Kara asks a question here, do you think social media engagement could ever replace traditional customer service channels? Yeah, based on what I just said, that's an interesting question. I think it's possible. I think that what it probably would not replace would be customer service that's occurring in a setting where, in a kind of bricks and mortar setting. So the kinds of problems that would occur at, say, a hotel or an educational institution. So I think there are things that we're going to learn online, but then there will be things that have to happen basically, in the setting itself. And a lot of those have to do with managing HR to be able to resolve the problems that occur. So that's where I think customer service can play a big role in helping, not often, sometimes in detecting the problem, because it may be that it's a live problem that's presented to them, but also in helping resolve those problems that occur, whether they're observed in a social media setting or they're observed in a in-person setting. I think customer service, the people that are trained to be able to handle those kinds of problems, I think that's an important skill set. And I think a lot of companies underestimate how important it is to be able to get that right. We use this term service recovery in the field to capture this idea of really recovering from service failures, which were almost inevitable when you think about running a business that's premised on service. Things just don't always go as planned. So what is it that the companies plan to resolve those, to recover from those problems? Just like we talked about with the crisis management, that's something that needs to be dealt with kind of ahead of time. We need to know what those plans are. Okay, here's a question from Ali. Tadlua, who's a daytime student from 1986. Thanks for the question, Ali. So he asks, do you have a point of view on the impact of social media and marketing analytics on qualitative customer research? This is an excellent question, so thank you for asking it. One of my biggest worries about all of the data that's being generated in social media, and then really just the whole explosion of data that we see as part of the whole growth of marketing analytics, is that it could drive out qualitative types of customer research. And I think that would be a mistake. I know that in my class and a lot of other classes, and I think among the most successful companies, there's a lot of qualitative work that's done. And by that I mean spending time with customers, interacting directly with your customer, observing their life in totality, that overall demand landscape that's giving rise to various kinds of pain points or sources of delight that you want to be able to understand and utilize. Those aren't things necessarily that we would see, for example, if we were just looking at social media or we were looking at some of the quantitative data that might be part of a larger database of marketing analytics. So I think it's important, especially as we think about designing the product and services, and also creating new value for customers over time. This is something, as we observe their lives, as we observe them interacting directly with our products and services, we can generate a lot of interesting ideas. I do a session here in my daytime marketing strategy class where I bring IDEO in, and we spend an entire class session with the leaders of IDEO, which is, one of them is a Fuqua alum, Misa Masano, 2009 daytime alum. And she takes them through the IDEO tools, which of course there's many different kinds of qualitative tools, but IDEO I think in particular has this very customer-centric way that they approach the customer, and deeper understanding of, again, what's going on in the customer's life, how they're interacting directly with the product or service. I think that's a very, very important part of, again, designing great products and services, also innovating new value for the customers over time. And I would add, Ali, that I think it's important that this not just be done by some market intelligence group within the company, but that I think in the best companies, in fact, the executives are the ones that they're spending time. They're behind the counter at the drugstore interacting with the customer as they use the cosmetics. They're running the cash register at the supermarket, interacting with the customer as they, go through the whole process of purchasing products and services. They may even be stocking the shelves. I think in the best companies, we see the executives out there in the field, not all the time, of course, but for a certain amount of time, directly interacting with the customer. So getting out of that corner office, really spending time with the customers. Also, we see companies doing this in, I think, interesting ways too, where they might use a set of what you could call empathy tools, where they try to sort of simulate what the customer's experience would be like. And in my class, I talk about, for example, Walgreens, how they have the executives actually wear clouded glasses and have gloves that make it difficult for them to move their hands. They put popcorn in their shoes, so they have this unsteady feeling, all three of which simulate an elderly customer's experience being in the store. And so the executives walk around the store with these tools in place, and they get a better understanding of what kinds of problems might occur when elderly customers, who are a big part of their target customers, come into the store. So I think that's an important way to think about how to complement the quantitative tools that you might get with various kinds of qualitative tools. So I think that about wraps it up. Thank you so much for the questions. It's great to see so many familiar names, and I appreciate the involvement that all of you have had in the session. If you are a marketing leader, I would encourage you, just a little sales pitch here, I would encourage you to participate in the CMO survey. Write to me. If you're part of a company where your marketing leader is not part of the survey, again, please encourage them to participate. Of course, the faculty conversations series will continue, and the next faculty presenter will be Kathy Clark, who's going to talk about impact investing. And you'll get some details online from the alumni office in April on that talk. So again, thank you very much, and we're expecting to have 8 to 12 inches of snow here in Durham, so we're happy that we were able to do this session with you here today. So thanks again, and take care.